Next up, I'm very, very pleased to introduce a pioneer in sports and in marketing who now runs a league of her own. Lisa Baird was named commissioner of the National Women's Soccer League in February of 2020. Now, think about that, February of 2020, and is responsible for overseeing all operations for the league. She had to suspend the 2020 season in March, 2 days after her official first day, but then led the league to return to live sports last year, the first to do so. Baird and her team led the league through the competitions in 2020 with not a single confirmed positive COVID test case. Prior to the National Women's Soccer League, she was served as the Chief Marketing Officer for New York Public Radio, spent nearly a decade as the CMO of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and before that was the SVP of Marketing at the NFL. Baird also worked at IBM as a Senior Vice President for Worldwide Marketing Communications and had various positions at GM, including as Chief Creative Officer of EGM. And prior to that, she worked in positions with leading consumer product companies, including P&G. So welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you. That's a very, very long list of companies, so we won't go there. But I have to say, I started my career at P&G.
Yeah, you started with P&G, and that is not a qualification for coming to the Signal stage, but it's very interesting how many accomplished people at one time or another walk through these halls. So let's start with your career now. Let's go to the league that you run. Walk us through kind of the moment when you realized you had to stop play, in your first week, right? And then how did you manage, what was the process of getting back onto the field?
Well, I think that, it's 14 months ago now. It doesn't seem that long, but a lifetime for me. I joined the league on Tuesday. My first day of work was Tuesday, and I remember I traveled to Chicago, our offices, and when I came back, it was a short trip because I had to get back to New York for a meeting. And I remember, that moment, everybody in this audience has probably had that moment when you're on a plane and for some reason, you don't have your phone on, it's not wireless connected, and you get down and all of a sudden you look at it and there's that one moment, right? And that one moment for me on Wednesday night, 24 hours later, was the NBA shutting down their league because they had one of their Utah Jazz players test positive. It evidently was a moment that every league looked at because in short order, an entire industry hit the pause button, an entire industry. And it was the word that I described then, because I was brand new on my job. I had talked to my owners about a vision. I, had initial looks at it was, okay, I'm shutting down because it is the safe thing to do. Live sports and our sport is a contact sport. We had to shut down. There was nothing else that we could do. Was that first moment was the sobering realization, I think, of what the pandemic was. Forgetting my view as a commissioner or not, it was crystal clear that this was going to be something that would fundamentally change us. And I think the sports industry got to that, maybe because we're live sports, maybe whatever it is, we got to that because we all shut down. I had that moment, and then you kind of hit the pause and you're looking around, we're trying to, I didn't even have a work computer at that point in time. I was literally working from my phone. And I started assembling kind of information. And I started calling around to people I knew in the sports industry. I'd been in the sports industry a long time, the Olympics, the NFL. And it was that second moment of clarity where no one had a playbook for a pandemic. No one. There are leagues that are much more well-resourced. No one had a playbook. And about 3 weeks into it, I started to get to work to write our own playbook. And I will give a little bit of head nod to P&G at this point, because as you guys know, everybody on this phone, those first lessons, they teach you to be solution oriented. They teach you to tackle a problem, not be afraid of it, figure out the data behind it, whatever. And that's what I did, is I just started to break down what was a insurmountable task into different digestible projects. What would the medical protocols be? No one had them. No one had medical protocols. What would they be? Who were the doctors and scientists that I could use to do that? What would be the competition format? We couldn't go back and do a regular season. Some leagues did choose to do that, because of health reasons and involved. We chose to do a bubble. What would be the competition in the bubble? And on it went on. How would we do this? One of the first things was, we're a small league. How do we have the resources to enable us to do this? I applied, with small business. I applied for a PPP loan. I remember sitting down one day at my computer for 7 hours filling out a loan program for JP Morgan. And thank God we got a loan 7 days later. But at that moment in time, we had to realize we had to create a commercial resource so that we could enable ourselves to pay our players, because our players were partners with us. They were the ones going back in the field. They were the ones whose health was in my hands. And we had to have an enormous resource able to continue to pay them. My owners, stepped up. We created it. But I will tell you, we created a Challenge Cup, and I called Mark and Pritchard at P&G. He and I have a long relationship going back to the Olympics. We brought P&G into the Olympics at Team USA. And I said, Mark, here's where we are. What can we do together that would help P&G and the Secret brand, what could do? And we actually, with Jim Candle and Mark Pritchard and Janet, and the Secret brand, said, here's what we can do. And we then created a tournament, Olympic-style tournament. We figured out our host city in Utah. We created an athletes village. We created a competition. We created new protocols. We did it. And it was about late April or so. We're ready to do the press announcement. Our P&G's on board. Everything's, and I go down to my TV in my house, because we're all working in our house, and I turn it on, and there's Gary Bettman, who's the commissioner of the NHL. And I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. The NHL is coming back first. And then all of a sudden, after we'd done our press announcement with CBS, it literally dawned on me that we are the league that did it. We were the first team back. And we took every opportunity to introduce our league, our players, to the world and stage a safe tournament. But it was probably a once in a lifetime experience. But I will tell you, I went back to that training at P&G about how to take a problem apart, how to solve for the pieces, how to create a team to put order together. And my team happened to be some people from here, some people from there, partners like P&G and Verizon and Google and others. And it was an amazing summer. I'm really proud of what we accomplished, and proud of our players, proud of our doctors, and what we were able to do for our league.
Yeah, it's inspiring.
Probably a longer story than you wanted.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, I wanted to make a sort of off-script call. I think we have a Secret film. The film, not like a secret film, but the film from the brand Secret, related to all of this. So can we cue that and play it, or am I going to get yelled at?
I hope we can play that.
I broke my school's record for most career goals and career points.
I was drafted out of college while juggling life as a young mom.
But you didn't see me.
You didn't see us.
Because only 4% of sports media coverage is dedicated to women's sports. And worst of all, she might stop playing because she doesn't see herself.
So let's change the game.
Level the playing field.
And double the coverage for women's sports.
Equal work, equal sweat, equal play. Secret, all strength, no sweat.
So that probably brings back some memories.
Yeah, it was really fun. We did that with the P&G brand manager, and at the time, and remember, this was in July during the pandemic, and you couldn't shoot commercials. We had medical protocols. So P&G, they came to us about 2 weeks into it, and they're like, look, we found this startling insight that only 5% of total media is against women's sports. And I'm like, you're kidding. And I'm like, okay, that seems a little small to me. I'm not sure, okay, maybe we're not 50%, but 5% seems a bit small. And we got together and we said, let's do it. We produced a commercial on site with athletes, with Secret. We had our production team who was doing the game broadcast do the commercial. And what was interesting about that commercial, it showed in our championship, but if you go online now and you talk to anybody in sports today, they are talking about the insight that the secret brand manager and communications team came up with about the underperformance of the media and coverage of women's sports. That's what's holding us back. And we created that insight. We were out there with first, and everybody now is talking about it. And we're actually starting to see a real fundamental change in the bias that media has towards women's sports. We're starting to see it work. And it all happened, frankly, just out of that conversation. And sometimes that happens, you've got to have someone who has an incredibly brilliant idea. And in this case, Secret did. And then you have to have me on the other side saying, okay, we're going to do what it takes to make it happen. And we're starting to change an entire industry, which is the sports media industry and coverage of women's sports.
Well, this is an industry that in the span of, say the last 10 or 15 years of your career, outside of the sports industry, society has had a major, awakening, I guess you could say, about gender equality. And I'm curious, from your experience at the Olympics, your experience at the NFL, to the story that you just told, how much of this is folding in with a broader conversation about equality and equity across society?
Yeah, I think this is a time of change, and change is incredibly exciting, and it needs to happen on all levels of inclusion and equality. Let me just call it that way. Because it's not only equality, it's including people in the conversation, and it's change that is overdue, that's happening. It's also change that's hard. And I'll talk to you about like sport because, at some level, one thinks that the pitch, the playing field is an equalizer, right? It's who's fastest, who has the most accuracy, who's the strongest. One thinks that that's an equalizer, but we find that there is inherent bias and inherent views and perspectives that need to change. Even we as a sport, as a very progressive sport on the landscape, because we're 9 years old, because we're women's sports and we lead. I mean, the only employees we have, right, are this. We're really searching for those new ideas, that new inclusionary outlook. And I'll give you a great example. We have a transgender policy that we are actively pushing out, but we need to change the vocabulary and how we talk about our transgender athletes. And one of the things that I'm considering, because I'm the commissioner and I want to be inclusionary thing, is our brand name is the National Women's Soccer League. Should that, next year's our 10th anniversary, we're looking at refreshing our brand. Do we need to define ourselves with a qualifier of women anymore? Are we at that point now where we need to push through this and deal with language and bias and opportunity in a way that's very much straightforward? My ambition is not to be the top women's sports. My ambition is to be a top sport. And I think we have the competitive quality of play. I think we have the teams. I think we have the athletes and players that enable us to do us, but we have to fundamentally change, and it starts from within. A small thing, we do an award every week, and it was entitled the Woman of the Week, right? Makes sense. Well, all of a sudden we realized, well, why are we doing that? Let's call it the Player of the Week, and we make that transition. So those are small things, but it goes to this big challenge we all have to transform ourselves. And the challenge, I think, that people like myself and people in P&G have is, you've got to lead in this area, but you have to lead out loud. You are now leading in an environment where you are challenged, where your fans and your stakeholders need to be part of that dialogue and that transformation. Sometimes that's uncomfortable and hard. And leading out loud, where you're constantly having to move and transform with the eye of social media on you, with the eye of the media on you, with increasing scrutiny by, people like, grade you with ESG things. it brings out a different style of leadership, to be an inclusionary leadership. It's one that we want to excel at in the National Women's Soccer League, but it's definitely a challenge.
Me to the next question I wanted to raise, and we saw a little bit of it even in that short film that we just watched. The players are not simply players anymore, and in sports in particular, we see that players take their platforms very seriously. Their fame becomes an opportunity for them to have a point of view on any number of issues, and it's almost expected of them. And that is also true, as you point out, for leaders, for commissioners, for CEOs, for executives at a company, for company brands, to have a point of view, to take a point of view, and that is sometimes uncomfortable. How do you manage a large league of talent where everyone is starting to believe that they have the right to say what they feel? And how do you align that with needing to drive, an organization in one direction?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and it is a challenge, I think, to all leaders. Let me talk about the tension that's inherent in, and maybe it's not just my job, but the intention that's inherent in my job as the commissioner. By its nature, a sports league is about rules. The rules are there to ensure that the game is played fairly, is played equitably, with integrity. The rules are there to ensure health and safety. The rules are there to ensure that there is longevity, right? We don't have a loose battlefield, if you will. It's a very tightly scripted battlefield for a lot of reasons. That's the nature of sport. It isn't the nature of business. On the other hand, as you said, we have a progression that's happening and a change that's happening in our country and the world. And so you have to be that leader that can manage and set rules and set principles, at the same time manage with soft hands. We need to know that players have not only points of view, but they're going to do things because their mission sometimes is to make you uncomfortable, is to make people sit inside and see an issue, particularly in the area of social justice, from their point of view. That is what they're doing. They're trying to use their platforms and use their powerful voices. And as a commissioner or any leader, you've got to manage that with principle and integrity and with rules, but also with the ability to acknowledge that. And I'm really proud that during the pandemic, we were the first league back to allow our players to make that statement for social justice. They did it on the field. They did it with the anthem, which is quite a controversial thing in this country. But I not only allowed, but I openly endorsed their need to make the statement, because that is part of managing today.
Yeah. Well, I commend you, and I think your leadership approach has been, has really elevated the game, and there's much to be learned from it. I wish we could just keep talking. There's so much more to go over, but unfortunately we're out of time. I want to thank you, Lisa, for coming, and I hope you'll rejoin us soon.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.